I want to switch gears a little bit.
Sure.
You wrote a book a few years ago, basically to help people start to get healthy. Why can that be so hard for people? Especially this time of year, we're getting close to New Year's resolutions.
Yeah.
Why is it so hard for people to get down a different path?
I wrote a book called A Healthier Ever After a few years back, and I used fairy tales and children's stories and cartoon characters to talk about health topics. And it wasn't for little kids, it was, hey, remember you learned lessons as a kid from these characters? Well, here's some new lessons to learn. And when I did this in lectures, because that's most of what I've done is lecturing, like 3 years later, someone was like, Winnie the Pooh, Winnie the Pooh. They remembered it. And so the correlation was there, and it made them connect to it. I think that's sometimes a challenge. You know, I've been doing this not as long as many others, but for quite a while, and I find that a lot of people feel overwhelmed, and they don't know where to begin. So years ago, it was, I don't know what to do. Now the problem is, there's so much to do, where do I begin? People have a hard time because they feel like they have to be perfect. That's one of the things in my book I emphasize. There's no such thing as perfect health. Great health is achievable, but perfect health is not. And they also make it, you're a human, you're allowed to make mistakes. You're not the same as your neighbor. You know, what works for one person may not work the same for another. So that's kind of where that book was. It's funny that some of the major, not naming them, retailers said it was too general. If it was like on vitamin C or this, they would take it. But because it's a general book, they didn't find it to be beneficial. I said, are you serious? I covered 7, 8, 10 categories in the store to educate consumers and patients alike on probiotics, on coconut oil, on adaptogenic herbs, on enzymes, on major topics that everyone needs to know at least a foundation on. And they're like, yeah, it's not specific enough. But those who read it really appreciate it. I'm very proud of the book, even if it didn't get huge exposure initially. In fact, I'm working on 2 books right now. One is a cultural perspective book, kind of related to where we are as a society and relates to health and cannabis and so forth. But the other book I'm working on is a how to get started book. Okay. That has been, again, the question you had was great. It's how do people get going? And the book is very simple. It's saying if I gave you 5 things you had to do every day to be healthy, most people wouldn't do it.
Right.
If I gave you a list of 50 things you could do to be healthy and said, let's just start by taking 2, any 2, an easy one, a hard one, this one or that one, most people can feel that's doable. And the idea is that take 2, get comfortable with them, and when the 2 are so comfortable that you're barely even thinking about them, take 2 more. There are thousands of health tips out there. I call them hip tips, because I have a whole movement called For the Hip, health-inspired people, health-inspired person. It's not about being perfect, it's just being desiring to feel a little better, to take a little more responsibility, to be a conscious consumer, which is another thing emphasized in my book and in my platform. You don't have to be labeled anything other than a conscious consumer. It means I care and I'm putting thought to my action. If you do that, you're on the right path. Again, people go, oh, doc, I want to be like you, I want to be healthy like you. I'm like, don't look at me. I live on airplanes, I live in hotels, I travel a lot. Like, believe me, if I lived home and didn't do those things, I'd be healthier. But go and be your own best health individual. Find what works for you. And it's a process. I said learning to live and live well is a lifelong process. If you meet someone that says, I know it all, or I'm an expert, don't listen to them. Even last night in my talk, I said, I don't know everything here. And they all applauded. They're like excited that you can say, I don't have to know it all. Yeah. And so that's really a great thing. I just tell people it's great to be inspired. I love millennials and young people, which over the last 10 years I've seen the shift. I've been pushing the shift. And the younger we get started being more responsible, it doesn't mean you can't party, you can't have fun, you can't eat anything you want. I'm not an extremist by any means. I'm a very much a moderate, but I'm a moderate by consciousness. Like, think about what you're doing. I'll go out and do beer and a burger if I make that choice, not because I have no idea what the impact's going to be. Yeah. So I think that's what people need to know is through education and empowerment, they can make themselves better. Even a little bit at a time makes a big difference.